At 5:30 a.m., Fort Lincoln was already awake. The base moved with a kind of quiet rhythm, the kind that only came from years of discipline and repetition. The hum of diesel generators carried through the cool air, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee from the mess hall. In the distance, a formation of soldiers ran across the parade ground, their voices blending into a steady cadence that echoed against the hangars. The sound rose and fell like a single heartbeat, reminding anyone who heard it that this place lived by order and routine. The airfield lights blinked softly beyond the chain-link fence. A Cessna 172 sat on the tarmac, its propeller turning slowly as an instructor and trainee prepared for an early flight. The low growl of Humvees rumbled near the perimeter road, their headlights sweeping across the barracks before fading into the mist. Inside the main administrative building, fluorescent lights flickered to life, one by one, illuminating spotless floors and freshly waxed tiles that reflected the gray-blue light of dawn. Even before the first salute of the day, everything was already in motion, practiced and precise. Maintenance crews worked quietly, tightening bolts, checking equipment, wiping down surfaces. Every movement had a rhythm, every sound a place in the pattern. The base felt alive but restrained, its energy contained by discipline. Outside the operations wing, the flagpole stood waiting, the stars and stripes still folded and ready for morning colors. For now, the only sound was the soft hiss of the wind through the flag's halyard. The moment felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath before the day began. In that silence, under the dim lights of the corridor, a mop bucket rolled softly across the floor, marking the arrival of someone no one noticed yet. At 6:15 a.m., Margaret Hayes moved through the main corridor of Fort Lincoln with the same rhythm the base itself seemed to follow. The floors gleamed behind her, as if responding to her touch. Her mop strokes were long and deliberate, each one straight, even, and patient. Her posture never slouched. Even in gray coveralls and worn boots, she carried herself with a presence that felt almost ceremonial. The name patch on her chest read M. Hayes. Though few ever took the time to notice, most people saw only the mop bucket, the cleaning cart, and the quiet woman who never interrupted anyone's day. She started her mornings before the first call for formation, long before the base commander arrived or the flag was raised. Her routine never changed. She would wipe the glass along the memorial wall, then pause to trace a few etched names with her fingertips. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if whispering a roll call no one else could hear. There was reverence in her stillness. Not sadness, but duty. A ritual of remembering. When she straightened, her eyes were calm, her back unbent, and her pace unhurried. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that respect doesn't need to be seen to be real. Her uniform was simple, but her attention to it was not. The faded blue cap she wore was old, yet spotless, its stitching carefully repaired. When she lifted a mop bucket, a faint scar along her right forearm caught the fluorescent light. No one ever asked about it, and she never explained. Her tools were arranged with precision, bottles lined by height, rags folded into perfect squares. Even the flag bracket in the hallway never escaped her notice. She adjusted it by instinct, aligning it just so. Before moving on, when soldiers passed her, she greeted them softly, her tone even and respectful. Using sir and ma'am with the natural ease of habit, they nodded out of courtesy, unaware that the small gestures of discipline they practiced daily were the same ones she had once lived by. There was something about her presence that steadied the room, like order followed wherever she walked. At 7:15 a.m., the hallway outside the break room smelled of coffee and floor wax. The morning light filtered through the narrow windows, washing the tile in pale gold. A group of young officers leaned against the counter, laughing too loudly for the early hour. Their uniforms were sharp, their rank bars freshly pinned, their confidence unchecked. Lieutenant Cole Reeves, tall and restless, held his cup like a badge of authority. His voice carried down the corridor as he talked about efficiency reports and inspections. Then his eyes caught sight of Margaret Hayes, moving quietly at the far end of the hall, her mop sliding back and forth in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He grinned, nudging the lieutenant beside him. "Guess she missed the memo," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Uniforms are for soldiers, not janitors." The group laughed, the kind of shallow, echoing laughter that bounces off clean walls and sounds harsher than anyone intends. Margaret didn't look up. She kept her steady rhythm, the mop gliding across the floor in smooth, even lines. Her back stayed straight, her face calm. The officers kept watching, waiting for her to react. Reeves took another sip of coffee, pretending not to care. But his smirk didn't fade. The sound of boots stopped nearby. Sergeant Noah Briggs had been passing through it, clipboard in hand. He paused, his expression tightening as he watched the scene unfold. He had seen disrespect before, but this felt different. His eyes narrowed. Studying the woman's posture, she wasn't shrinking away or rushing to finish. She was centered, balanced, almost at attention. When Reeves told her to make sure she didn't miss a spot, she finally spoke. "Yes, sire." Her tone was steady, précise, with a kind of respect that sounded trained, not fearful. The sergeant's grip on his clipboard eased. He recognized that tone. The laughter faded, leaving an awkward silence that settled between the echoes. A few of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing it wasn't funny anymore. Reeves looked away, pretending to check his watch. His confidence cracked just a little. Margaret continued down the corridor. "Bukket rolling beside her." The mop leaving a perfect sheen behind. The faint scar on her forearm caught the light for a moment before disappearing beneath her sleeve. Briggs watched her go, his instincts whispering what his mind didn't want to say yet. That woman had once given orders, not taken them. Sergeant Noah Briggs lingered in the corridor long after the others had walked away. The laughter had died down, but its echo still hung in the air like a bad smell. He had spent 20 years in uniform, enough time to know the difference between someone beaten down and someone holding their ground. What he had seen in Margaret Hayes wasn't submission, it was control. Her calm wasn't the kind that came from resignation. It was the kind that came from training. He leaned against the wall, pretending to check his clipboard, and watched her work. She moved with precision that didn't belong to civilian life. Each step was measured, each motion efficient. No wasted energy. Her eyes swept the corridor as she worked, not in distraction but in quiet assessment. He had seen that same scanning motion in soldiers during patrol, checking corners and sightlines without even thinking about it. When officers passed her, she stepped aside at just the right time, never hesitating or fumbling with her tools. That awareness, that timing, was second nature to someone who had once lived by rank and order. Briggs could almost hear his old drill sergeant's voice calling it situational discipline. When she paused by the memorial wall, her shoulders straightened automatically. Her hand brushed against the edge of the frame before she gave a short plang, subtle nod. It wasn't ceremony. It was muscle memory. The kind of small ritual that only veterans kept alive without meaning to. Even the way she gripped the mop handle caught his attention. Her hands wrapped around it like it was a rifle stock. Firm but relaxed. Balanced between precision and readiness. He remembered the soldiers he had trained, the ones who carried that same steadiness long after they left the field. Posture like that didn't fade. It was built into the bones. The more he watched her, the clearer it became. This woman wasn't just cleaning floors. She was maintaining order the way she always had. Briggs felt a strange mix of respect and curiosity. a quiet certainty forming in the back of his mind. He didn't know who she had been, but he knew what she was. A soldier, through and through. At 6:45 a.m., the hallway outside the command office was still and bright. The memorial wall stood beneath the overhead lights, its bronze surface polished to a quiet glow. Margaret Hayes approached with the same measured pace she used for everything. Her reflection moved across the engraved names like a shadow that belonged there. She reached out with a steady hand, tracing a few of the etched letters as if reading them by touch. Her lips moved soundlessly, reciting names that only she remembered. There was no sadness in her expression, only respect. It looked like a ritual she had performed many times, one that kept her anchored to the people she once led and lost. The small American flag next to the wall had loosened slightly on its bracket. Without hesitation, she adjusted it until the stripes hung straight and the field of blue tilted at the correct angle. Her movements were automatic, done with the precision of someone who still knew the regulations by heart. For a moment, she stood back, studying the alignment until it met her unspoken standard. Then she nodded, satisfied, and continued her work. The wheels of her cleaning cart squeaking softly as she pushed it down the hall. The faint smell of polish and detergent followed her, mixing with the scent of coffee drifting from the admin wing. Later that afternoon, when the day had grown busier and the noise of offices filled the corridor, a small accident broke the rhythm. Her cart bumped the corner of a door frame, and a worn leather notebook slid out, landing with a dull thud on the floor. A round metal coin rolled from between its pages and spun to a stop near a young private's boot. He bent down to pick it up, and the insignia caught the light. 2nd Armored Division Command. He read aloud under his breath. The coin was heavy and thick, about 2 inches wide, with raised edges and a burnished finish only found on presentation-grade command coins. He looked up, unsure. Margaret smiled faintly as she took it back. "Just a reminder," she said quietly, slipping the coin and notebook into her pocket. Her tone was final, leaving no room for curiosity. The private nodded, sensing that whatever story lay behind it wasn't meant for him. As she walked away, the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence again. For those paying attention, the mystery of Margaret Hayes deepened, carried in the calm confidence of a woman who had already earned every ounce of respect she never asked for. Lieutenant Cole Reeves had been at Fort Lincoln for barely 3 weeks, but he carried himself as if the base were his to command, fresh out of advanced officer training. He walked with the polished confidence of someone who had read more leadership manuals than he had lived real moments of leadership. Inspection day was approaching, and the administrative wing buzzed with tension. Clipboards snapped shut, boots echoed down the hall, and soldiers moved in crisp lines, preparing for the base commander's arrival. Reeves loved this energy. It was his chance to be seen giving orders, to look like the kind of officer who had everything under control. But lately, the rumor about the janitor had begun to bother him. Some enlisted soldiers whispered that the older woman in gray coveralls had once worn a uniform herself. A few even saluted her when they thought no one was watching. Reeves found it ridiculous. To him, respect was earned by rank, not by rumor. He was the one with the gold bar on his chest, and he didn't appreciate anyone blurring that line. The more people seemed to notice Margaret Hayes, the more it irritated him. So he decided to make a point. At 7:30 a.m., he reviewed his readiness roster, checking boxes that barely needed checking, his clipboard tucked under his arm like a weapon. Soldiers were polishing boots, straightening collars, and running last-minute checks on the administrative offices. The floor shone so brightly that the overhead lights reflected off it like glass. When he spotted Margaret mopping near the main entrance, his plan took shape. He strode over, his voice sharp enough to carry down the corridor. "Hayes, you'll stay right here during the inspection," he said, Keep the floor spotless. I want the commander to see how hard our civilian staff works." His tone dripped with irony. Margaret looked up briefly, meeting his gaze with calm, unreadable eyes. "Yes, sir," she replied evenly. Then she returned to work, her movements as smooth as ever. Reeves smirked, satisfied with what he thought was control. But across the hall, Sergeant Briggs had been watching. The exchange made his stomach tighten. He recognized that same quiet patience from the field, the look of someone who knew exactly what was coming, even when others didn't. Reeves turned and walked off, already picturing the commander's approval, unaware that his little demonstration would soon unravel his own pride in front of everyone. By 8:45 a.m., the administrative wing of Fort Lincoln looked like a photograph out of a field manual. The air smelled of floor polish, brewed coffee, and nerves. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the corridor where every surface gleamed, and every edge looked squared by precision. Solji moved quickly but quietly, double-checking readiness checklists, adjusting uniforms, and straightening nameplates. The echo of boots on the tile blended with the low murmur of officers reviewing talking points. Inspection day always felt like a performance. And today, Lieutenant Cole Reeves was determined to be its star. He moved down the hallway with a clipboard tucked under his arm, firing short orders without slowing his stride. "Check that file alignment," he said to an aide. "Tighten that formation spacing." His tone carried confidence but lacked weight, the kind of authority that came from position, not presence. To him, this inspection was proof of his command of the wing, and the spotless corridor was his stage. At the far end, Margaret Hayes stood beside her mop bucket, working with quiet, rhythmic precision. Her strokes were even, slow, deliberate. The faint squeak of the mop head was the only sound that dared interrupt the tension. Reeves glanced her way, pausing just long enough to deliver a cutting remark. "Make sure you don't miss a spot." Hayes. The commander's got an eye for detail. She stopped for a moment, looked up, and answered evenly. "No, sir. It's spotless." The tone was soft but certain, layered with something steady that made Reeves hesitate. There was no sarcasm, no fear, just the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was doing. Sergeant Briggs, standing farther down the hall, caught the exchange and felt that same flicker of recognition, the stillness in her movements, the calm that came not from obedience but from command, was impossible to miss. At 900 hours sharp, the sound of an approaching convoy broke through the corridor. The inspection party entered with crisp salutes and clipped voices. The base commander led the group, followed by a few senior staff officers, their decorations glinting under the lights. Reeves stepped forward, posture perfect, rehearsing his welcome as if reading from memory. "Sir, administrative wing, ready for inspection." The commander gave a short nod and began the walkthrough, his eyes scanning every corner. As the entourage advanced, the corridor seemed to hold its breath. The commander's gaze passed over Margaret without pause. Though something in her bearing caught his attention for a heartbeat, she stood straight, hands clasped lightly behind her back, eyes steady ahead, not deferential, not nervous, simply present. The commander's stride faltered slightly before he continued. Briggs saw it and almost smiled. Reeves, oblivious, continued his speech about discipline and performance, unaware that the quiet woman polishing the floor had just commanded the moment without saying a word. The group moved past, their voices fading down the hall. Margaret resumed her slow, even rhythm, mop sliding in perfect lines across the tile. Briggs remained where he was, the edges of a realization forming in his mind. Reeves thought he had control of this corridor, but the truth was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. The The room already belonged to her. At 10:25 a.m., the administrative wing of Fort Lincoln erupted into chaos. A shrill alarm pierced the air, followed by a metallic voice over the loudspeaker. Security drill. Possible base lockdown. All personnel remain in designated zones. Red lights began to flash across the corridor, their reflection slicing through the polished tile. Doors slammed. Radios crackled. And the calm precision of inspection morning shattered in an instant. Lieutenant Cole Reeves froze for half a second, then fumbled with his handheld radio, barking disjointed orders. Lock the west corridor. No. Hold. Check the main entrance. Soldiers scrambled. Their movements uncertain, civilians stood frozen, unsure of where to go. Margaret Hayes didn't move. She stood perfectly still by her mop bucket, eyes tracking the hallway like a field officer reading terrain. Her breathing slowed, steady and deliberate, the noise fading around her as if she were back in a combat command center. In seconds, she understood what no one else had seen. The east corridor had a clear line of sight from the main entrance. If this had been a real breach, that was where the threat would hit first. Her voice cut through the confusion with a calm authority that silenced the noise around her. Lieutenant, move your team to the east wing. Seal those doors. You're exposed to the main entrance. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Reeves stared, his mouth half open, unsure how to respond. Then instinct took over. The soldiers obeyed. They didn't question her. They simply moved, sealing the east corridor exactly as protocol dictated, securing civilians behind secondary bulkhead doors. The hall filled with motion, but this time it was coordinated. Margaret called out distances, checked sight lines, and directed one soldier to secure the operations wing door. Her tone was clipped, clear, and entirely professional. Even the younger enlisted men followed her words without hesitation. Within minutes, the chaos transformed into control. Then the double doors at the far end burst open. The base commander strode in, his presence filling the hall like a storm front. What in the world is going on here? His voice was sharp, controlled fury. Reeves snapped to attention, stammering something about confusion and drill coordination. But the commander's eyes had already taken in the scene, the secured corridors, the positioned personnel, the calm stillness at the center of it all. Who issued the lockdown orders? The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Sergeant Briggs stepped forward. Sir. It was her. He nodded toward Margaret. The commander turned slowly. For a moment, he said nothing. He studied her stance, her hands clasped behind her back, her shoulders square, her expression composed. Then his gaze landed on her name patch. Hayes. He repeated it quietly, like a word he hadn't said in years. Margaret Hayes. The recognition hit him visibly. He straightened, his expression softening from confusion to reverence. The hall went completely still as he lifted his hand in a sharp, formal salute. Ma'am. His voice dropped low, full of weight. It's an honor. Reeves froze, his face draining of color. Around him, soldiers stiffened, unsure what to do. Margaret returned the salute with crisp precision, her hand steady, hair gaze unwavering. The commander lowered his arm, still studying her as if piecing together memory and presence. Major General Hayes. Retired. 2nd Armored Division. He spoke the words quietly, but they carried through the hallway. You once commanded this base. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above them. The same corridor that had echoed with arrogance hours before now felt sacred. Reeves swallowed hard, unable to meet her eyes. The soldiers who had followed her moments ago stood straighter, realizing who they had just obeyed. Margaret's tone remained even. Just doing what training taught me, sire. The commander nodded slowly. You never stopped. Did you? She shook her head once. No. Sire. Some habits keep you ready. The tension broke, replaced by silence thick with respect. The base, for the first time that morning, was truly at attention. The air in the corridor seemed to thicken until it was almost still. The red emergency lights had stopped flashing, leaving the bright overheads humming faintly against the silence. The base commander stood squarely in front of Margaret Hayes, his face composed, but his eyes filled with something between awe and disbelief. Around him, soldiers lined both sides of the hallway, frozen in place, their posture instinctively straightening. The sound of shifting boots echoed like distant thunder. For a few long seconds, no one breathed. Then the commander moved. Slowly, deliberately. He brought his right hand up to his brow and held a perfect salute. His motion was steady, deliberate. Every line of his arm sharp with precision. It was the kind of salute that carried weight beyond protocol, one born from respect, not obligation. The hallway went utterly silent. The kind of silence that feels alive, heavy with memory. Margaret stood before him, still in her gray coveralls. The name patch on her chest slightly faded, her mop bucket at her side. The contrast between who she appeared to be and who she truly was made the moment almost surreal. Her hand rose in response, crisp and sure. It was not hurried, not emotional, but exact. The movement carried decades of discipline. Thousands of salutes given and returned. The commander's hand trembled once before it steadied, his jaw tightening as he looked into her eyes. There was no need for words. Every soldier present understood they were witnessing something sacred respect that had been earned long before any of them had set foot on this base. Lieutenant Cole Reeves stood off to the side, his clipboard slipping from his hand, the plastic clattering softly against the tile. He didn't move to pick it up. The color drained from his face as realization set in. The woman he had mocked, ordered, and used for show was a major general, retired. The very person whose leadership stories he had once studied in training briefs, without knowing her name. His chest felt hollow, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Lincoln, he didn't know how to stand. Sergeant Briggs, standing near the memorial wall, felt his throat tighten. Without thinking, his heels snapped together, and his hand rose to his brow in a clean salute. It lasted longer than regulation, but no one noticed. Across the hall, other soldiers followed, one by one, until the entire corridor was lined with motionless figures at attention. No one had ordered it. They simply knew. The commander's voice finally broke the silence, low and reverent. For the record, he said, this woman once commanded the 2nd Armored Division during Operation Iron Shield. The words rippled down the hallway in whispers. Operation Iron Shield. That was legend. Some soldiers murmured that she had refused to leave wounded behind. Others remembered hearing about the convoy she led through crossfire to save an entire battalion. Margaret's expression didn't change. She simply lowered her hand and nodded once. Her eyes were calm, her shoulders steady, her stance unshaken. Her uniform had changed, but her bearing had not. In that moment, she looked every bit the leader she had always been. The commander dropped his salute last, the motion slow and deliberate. Like an act of final acknowledgement, he took one step back, allowing her the space that belonged to her. The corridor remained silent for another long moment, before sound returned: the faint creak of boots, the distant hum of ventilation, the collective breath of those who understood they had just witnessed something they would never forget. Leadership, they realized, wasn't worn on a collar or displayed on a nameplate. It lived in presence, in composure, in how a person stood when everything fell apart. Margaret Hayes hadn't demanded respect. She had reminded them what it looked like. By 6:30 a.m., Fort Lincoln was awake again. The sun had just broken the horizon, spreading pale gold light across the flight line and rooftops. The base moved with quiet purpose, but there was something different in the air. Conversations were softer, nods were sharper, and every small sound, the rattle of a coffee cup, the thud of boots on the floor, seemed to carry more weight. The story of what had happened the day before had already traveled across every wing and motor pool. Soldiers spoke of it in low tones over breakfast, repeating it like something half legend and half lesson. The janitor in the gray coveralls was no longer invisible. She was part of the base's story now. Margaret Hayes arrived at her usual time. Walking through the administrative hallway with her mop bucket and cleaning cart, the hum of the air conditioning filled the corridor, blending with the faint cadence of morning drills outside. A few enlisted soldiers passed her, straightening instinctively and greeting her with a soft ma'am. She nodded back, her reply calm and steady. Near the entrance, the light caught on something new, a brass nameplate, freshly mounted beside her cart, gleamed under the fluorescent bulbs. The engraving read Major General Rhett, Margaret A. Hayes, Facility Advisor. Lieutenant Cole Reeves stood beside it, polishing the surface one last time with a cloth. His expression was quiet, almost solemn. The same man who had once mocked her now seemed smaller, humbled not by reprimand but by understanding. When she approached, he stepped back and murmured that it was in place. She thanked him softly, her voice kind but simple, then turned to begin her work. Reeves watched her move down the hallway, her back straight, her pace unhurried, the mop sliding across the floor with the same discipline as before. He realized, too late, but not too late to change, that leadership wasn't about being seen, it was about earning trust when no one is watching. At 700 hours, the flag outside began to rise. The distant sound of cadence calls drifted through the open doors as Margaret stopped by the memorial wall. She reached out and traced the same names she had touched countless mornings before. Her lips moved soundlessly, promising what she always had to keep serving, in whatever way she could. Sergeant Briggs appeared from around the corner, offering her a small salute and an easy smile. She returned the gesture with a slight nod. A mutual understanding passing between them. Two soldiers, different ranks, same code. Life on base went on. Radios crackled. The mess hall opened. The sound of a transport engine rolled from the flight line, yet something beneath all that motion had changed. Young officers lowered their voices when she passed. Enlisted soldiers carried themselves with a little more pride. Fort Lincoln felt different, steadier somehow, as if reminded of what its walls were built for. By 7:15 a.m., the flag reached the top of the pole. Catching the morning breeze, Margaret stood near the glass doors, her hand resting over her heart. The sunlight reflected against the polished tile beneath her feet, faintly mirroring her image in the clean surface she had just finished. She looked at the flag and smiled, quiet and content. Her uniform might have changed, but her mission never had. Respect, she had always believed, wasn't about rank or command. It was about character. The kind that shows up early, does the work, and never needs to be seen to lead. At Fort Lincoln, that truth would stay long after her shift ended. Respect, they would say, never retires.